Imagine stepping onto a small fishing boat for what's supposed to be a routine trip, expecting to be back on shore within a few days, only to be swept away by a storm into the void of the Pacific Ocean. This was the terrifying reality of Salvador Alvarenga, who vanished from the coast of Mexico in November 2012 for 438 days, which is 14 months. He drifted helplessly across 6,700 miles of open water, battling starvation, dehydration, and the crushing weight of isolation in a small fiberglass boat. Alvarenga's story is one of the most extreme feats of human endurance ever recorded. He survived on a diet of raw seabirds, turtles, and rainwater. He watched his sole companion succumb to the elements before finally washing ashore in a remote atoll in the Marshall Islands. This is the story of José Salvador Alvarenga. Let's get spooky. Hey, spooky people, it's your best friend Kenny, and we are back with another disturbing story. Before we get to today's story, let's make sure that you subscribe to this channel, like, share this video, and leave a comment for the algorithm, and hit the hype button. Thank you. The Ordeal of José Salvador Alvarenga is a story of survival. He launched from coastal Azul, Mexico in November 2012 and made landfall on the Ebon Atoll in the Marshall Islands in January 2014. Alvarenga endured a drift of approximately 6,700 miles over 438 days. This amount of time far exceeds standard survival probability for an open boat without provisions or water equipment. The story is both a story of survival of the physical and psychological ravages of the Pacific Ocean and a complex web of legal and social challenges after he returned to civilization. José Salvador Alvarenga was a 36-year-old Salvadorian national living in Mexico. On November 17, 2012, he prepared for a deep-sea fishing expedition from the village of coastal Azul. Alvarenga was an experienced sailor and fisherman, and he relied on the sea for his livelihood. This trip was intended to be a standard 30-hour fishing trip targeting sharks, a lucrative but dangerous catch that required venturing significantly offshore. Alvarenga's usual fishing partner was reportedly unavailable, so he hired a substitute. He contacted Ezekiel Córdoba, a young fisherman who was approximately 24 years old. The relationship between Alvarenga and Córdoba was professional but distant. They weren't close friends, and they didn't have a long history of working together, especially in high-stress environments. Córdoba was described by his aunt as a hard-working young man who had experience at sea, yet he didn't have the seasoned resilience of the older Alvarenga. The boat for this trip was a 25-foot fiberglass skiff known regionally as a penga. These boats are used throughout Central American coastal waters. They're designed for speed and utility in nearshore environments. The boat was narrow, open top, and lacked any form of cabin or raised structure. The fact that it didn't have a shelter meant the occupants were completely exposed to the sun, rain, and wind, and other elements. The boat was powered by a single outboard motor. It carried standard fishing gear, a large refrigerator for storing the catch, a GPS device, and a two-way radio. It didn't carry sails, oars, a life rack, or emergency beacons. This ship is considered seaworthy for coastal operation, but it's very poorly suited for the open ocean. It's susceptible to swamping and high seas, and its lack of a keel makes it prone to rapid drift when it's not powered. The transition from a fishing trip to a survival ordeal was put into motion by a meteorological event known as a norte. Shortly after reaching their fishing grounds, approximately 50 to 80 miles offshore, the vessel was struck by a powerful storm. The norte winds in this area are notorious for their intensity, funneling through the Chivela Pass from the Gulf of Mexico and accelerating into the Pacific, creating hurricane-force gusts. The storm that hit Alvarenga lasted for 5 days, which obviously exhausted the crew and the vessel's mechanical limits. Alvarenga made a decision during the height of the storm to get rid of his catch. He and Córdoba discarded approximately 1,100 pounds of fresh fish and fishing gear. This decision was essential for survival, although it ensured that the trip wouldn't make any money. It increased the boat's buoyancy, preventing it from capsizing in the turbulent seas. But this also got rid of the primary food source and tools to acquire more food, leaving them with only the most basic supplies. Before their electronics failed, the crew managed to radio their position to their base on land. However, the outboard motor failed shortly thereafter, rendering the vessel unable to navigate the wind and current. Without a motor, the boat became an object that was subject to whatever the ocean wanted to do with it. The radio batteries died, or the unit was damaged by water, which cut their only link to communicating with the public and rescue. Search and rescue operations were initiated by local authorities in Chiapas. It was confirmed that a search was launched but was called off after only 2 days due to poor visibility and the severity of the weather. The search radius was likely determined based on the coastal drift patterns. But the intense norte winds had pushed Alvarenga's boat far beyond the standard search grid into the grip of the major Pacific currents. Once the storm subsided, the vessel was caught in the North Equatorial Current. This is a massive current that flows westward across the Pacific Ocean. It acts as a conveyor belt, transforming water from the coast of Mexico towards the Philippines and Indonesia. And scientists have confirmed that Alvarenga's trajectory was possible. A passive drift from Chiapas to the Marshall Islands, which is a distance of roughly 6,700 miles, would take approximately 12 to 14 months based on the average speed of the current. The boat's arrival in the Ebon Atoll in January 2014 was 14 months after its departure, providing scientific validation to Alvarenga's story. Survival in an open boat for 438 days requires the human body to undergo profound adaptations. The absence of fresh water and stored food required him to revert to primitive hunter-gatherer existence within the boat. The most important thing in this situation is to remain hydrated. People can survive weeks without food, but typically succumb to dehydration within 100 hours, or approximately 4 days. The vessel drifted through a region that was characterized by heavy rainfall. Alvarenga collected rainwater using the boat's hull and any available containers. This was his primary source of fresh water. During periods of drought, Alvarenga turned to sea turtles. He would capture them by hand and drink their blood. This is culturally taboo and sad, and also medically risky due to, the possibility of salmonella. But turtle blood can provide critical hydration and electrolytes. In the most desperate phases, Alvarenga drank his own urine. This should be a measure of last resort, because while it recycles some water, it concentrates urea and toxins, eventually accelerating renal failure. However, as a short-term bridge between rainstorms, it could contribute to survival. Alvarenga also utilized the technique of sucking spinal fluid from the backbones of fish, a method that was known to provide amounts of fresh hydration. Alvarenga's diet consisted entirely of raw sea protein. He didn't have any fishing gear because he threw it all away. So Alvarenga developed the ability to catch food with his bare hands. He grabbed sea turtles that surfaced to breathe or rest near the boat. He caught seabirds that landed on the boat to rest. Over time, the submerged hull of the Panga became an artificial reef. Barnacles and seaweed grew on the fiberglass, attracting small fish and crabs, which in turn attracted larger predators like dorados, sharks, and turtles. This ecosystem brought food directly to him. However, a diet of purely lean protein like raw fish can lead to what's called rabbit starvation, or protein poisoning. This is where the body consumes its own fat and muscle to metabolize protein. Alvarenga avoided this by consuming the entire animals, including livers, blood, and eyes, providing necessary lipids and vitamins to prevent scurvy and sustain his brain function. When he was rescued, Alvarenga didn't look like a emaciated skeleton that's typical of starvation victims. And that led to people being skeptical of his story. He appeared bloated and puffy, but medical professionals have identified his appearance as consistent with starvation-induced edema. After he was rescued, medical evaluations revealed that Alvarenga suffered from severe anemia and liver strain, which would also be consistent with a raw diet and having parasites for a long term. His healthy appearance was a symptom of his near-death state. Although he looked healthy, he was not. The typical castaway in a life raft remains immobile to conserve energy, but Alvarenga was active. He was constantly bailing water, hunting, and maintaining the boat. The physical exertion helped maintain some muscle tone, which further distinguished his silhouette from that of a typical starving victim. The physical toll on Alvarenga was immense, but the psychological toll was the primary threat to his survival. Ezekiel Córdoba did not have the same psychological or physical resilience as Alvarenga. Approximately 2 to 4 months into the voyage, the younger man began to succumb to the horror of their situation. Córdoba's decline was caused by a refusal to eat. He became revulsed by the diet of raw, foul-smelling seabirds and turtle blood. The refusal to eat was likely compounded by severe depression and hopelessness. Córdoba eventually died of starvation and dehydration. Alvarenga described the death as a slow fading away marked by despair. Before he died, Córdoba extracted a pact from Alvarenga. He made the captain promise not to eat his corpse and to find his mother to deliver a final message. He specifically asked Alvarenga to tell his mother not to make any more tamales for him and that he had gone with God. For 6 days, Alvarenga did not dispose of the body. Instead, he kept it on board, sitting across from him. He began to talk with the corpse, asking it questions and answering on its behalf. "How do you feel?" Alvarenga would ask. "I feel better. How about you?" he would answer for Cordoba. "I am fine." The behavior was a defense mechanism against the absolute solitude of the open ocean. Alvarenga eventually realized he was hallucinating the interaction and losing his grip on reality. Understanding keeping the body was driving him insane, he decided to fulfill the first part of the pact. He stripped the body of its clothes and slid Ezekiel Córdoba overboard. He reported fainting immediately after the exertion, a physical manifestation of the emotional trauma. To survive the remaining months alone, which was almost a year, by the way, Alvarenga began constructing an elaborate world. He employed a technique described as imaginary reality. He would pace the length of the small boat, imagining he was walking through his hometown or exploring different parts of the world. He visualized extensive feasts, tasting the food in his mind, imagining social interactions with families and loved ones. He utilized knowledge passed from his grandfather to track lunar cycles. He counted 15 lunar cycles during his drift, allowing him to maintain a sense of time. He often hallucinated regarding food, specifically dreaming of tortillas, his favorite food, which became a symbol of the life he was trying to return to. On January 30th, 2014, the currents of the Pacific Ocean finally put Alvarenga on land. Alvarenga's boat washed onto the reef of Tile Islet, a remote part of the Ebon Atoll in the Marshall Islands. He abandoned the boat and swam ashore, naked and clutching a knife. He was discovered by two locals who were staying in a small house on the islet. Alvarenga was incoherent, shouting in Spanish, a language the islanders did not understand. The physical toll was immediately evident to the rescuers. Although his face was puffy with edema, his legs were emaciated and he could barely walk. He was treated at a hospital in the capital of the Marshall Islands, Majuro, where he was diagnosed with severe dehydration, anemia, and low vitamin levels. His story of a 14-month drift immediately provoked skepticism. Officials and media outlets questioned how a man could survive so long without modern equipment. His bloated appearance was talked about by skeptics as evidence of a hoax. Mexican authorities validated the drift trajectory. The sheer consistency of his timeline with the known flow of the North Equatorial Current provided strong independent verification. Further, the survival of 3 Mexican fishermen in 2006 under similar circumstances provided a precedent for such a long-term survival in the region. The aftermath of Alvarenga's rescue proved to be as treacherous as the voyage itself. Upon the return to El Salvador and the subsequent publication of his memoir, 438 Days, Alvarenga became the target of high-stakes litigation. The most sensational and damaging legal challenge came from the family of Ezekiel Córdoba. Shortly after the release of his book, the family filed a lawsuit demanding $1 million in compensation. The plaintiffs alleged that Alvarenga survived by consuming the body of Ezekiel Córdoba. They accused him of cannibalism, contradicting Alvarenga's account that he had thrown the body overboard and had survived by eating fish and other raw marine protein. The basis of the lawsuit appeared to hinge on the pack. The family argued that the very existence of a promise not to eat the body implied that cannibalism was considered an option or threat. They utilized the survivor's own narrative of the promise to construct a theory of guilt. Alvarenga's legal team was led by attorney Ricardo Cucalón. They argued that there was no physical evidence to support the claim because the body was lost at sea. To clear his name, Alvarenga submitted to a polygraph examination. The test specifically asked his account of Cordoba's death and the disposal of the body. Reports confirmed that Alvarenga passed the test, with the results indicating no deception regarding his denial of cannibalism. Cucalón publicly argued that the lawsuit was a predatory attempt to extract money from the book royalties. He noted the family had previously stated they did not blame Alvarenga, but changed their stance once the book was published in 2015. I believe that this demand is part of a pressure from the family to divide proceeds of the royalties, Cucalón stated, clarifying that Alvarenga's actual earnings were far less than the rich man myth that the family believed. The cannibalism lawsuit was eventually dismissed against Alvarenga. The lack of evidence, combined with polygraph results and consistent medical data supporting his survival via the marine diet, led to the case being dismissed, although there was a mark on his reputation. Despite the legal problems, Alvarenga fulfilled the second part of his pact to Cordoba. He traveled to Mexico to meet Rosario, Cordoba's mother. He delivered the message her son had given him, that he was with God and she should not make tamales for him anymore. The meeting occurred before the lawsuit was filed, and it was initially considered a moment of closure. The subsequent legal proceedings suggest that grief mixed with poverty and the spectacle of fame can rapidly turn into litigation. The case of José Salvador Alvarenga is a testament to survival. His first survival was biological, a triumph of adapting to the most difficult survival situation possible, finding hunter-gatherer instincts and the psychological fortitude to endure 438 days while floating on a coffin-sized platform in the Pacific Ocean. The second survival was social. Upon his return, Alvarenga was turned into a celebrity, and his story was scrutinized, and he was treated like a suspect. The death of Ezekiel Córdoba turned a tragedy of starvation into a sensationalist accusation of cannibalism. The lawsuits filed against him were the harsh reality of modern survival, that escaping the ocean is only the beginning of an ordeal. Alvarenga survived the Pacific Ocean only to face the sharks of the legal system, eventually retreating into a quiet life in El Salvador, carrying the permanent weight of the 14 months that the world tried to buy, sell, and judge. Make sure that you're subscribed to this channel, The Spooky Lawyer. Make sure that you like, share, and leave a comment on this video for the algorithm. Follow me on Blue Sky, Twitter, and TikTok. My username is The Spooky Lawyer. If there is a disturbing story you would like me to cover, leave a comment and tell me about it, or send me an email. My email address is thespookylawyer@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the channel, there is a link in the description of this video and a link in my bio to buy me a coffee, so you can buy me a coffee. Or you can become a member of this channel. For the lowest tier, you can get access to exclusive content, including exclusive videos, as well as access to my videos before they go public. I appreciate you considering this. You can also support me by continuing to like, share, and watch my videos. And I do appreciate that you watch my videos. And please stay Spooky.